The Primrose was a sanctuary for the city's elite. Nestled on a quiet avenue, it stood as a beacon of sophistication. Inside, candlelit tables glowed beneath crystal chandeliers, and the faint strains of a live pianist wove seamlessly through the hum of polite conversation. It was the kind of place where every detail mattered, where even the garnish on a plate could define the evening. For Ethan Reeves, the restaurant was both a stage and a test. At 26, he had built a reputation as one of the most reliable waiters on staff. Polished yet approachable, Ethan had an instinct for making diners feel at home without ever overstepping the boundaries of fine dining decorum. But beneath his professional demeanor was a restless heart, a yearning for something more meaningful than meticulously delivering plates of foie gras and filet mignon. That Friday evening began like any other. The dining room was alive with the subdued energy of a full house. Ethan moved between tables with practiced ease, his mind running through orders, substitutions, and timing. Yet, as he approached table 14, something in the corner of his vision caught his attention. An elderly woman sat alone by the large bay window, her thin shoulders wrapped in a gray shawl. Her posture was upright, her movements measured. She exuded an understated elegance that suggested she was no stranger to places like this. But as Ethan delivered dishes to a nearby table, he noticed a tremor in her hands. Her breathing seemed heavier than it should have been, and her complexion had taken on a pale, almost ashen hue. Ethan hesitated for only a moment before making his decision. He approached her table, leaning down slightly so as not to draw attention. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said softly, "are you feeling all right?" The woman looked up, and Ethan was struck by the panic in her eyes. She tried to speak, but the words were choked off by a wheezing gasp. Her hand clutched the edge of the table as if it were the only thing anchoring her to her seat. Ethan's chest tightened. He knew what this was, a severe asthma attack. "Ma'am, it's okay," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm going to help you." Turning toward the center of the dining room, he raised his voice. "Someone call an ambulance." His words cut through the subdued hum of the restaurant, drawing the attention of staff and diners alike. The woman's breaths grew more labored, each one a desperate struggle. Ethan knelt beside her chair, gently guiding her forward to ease the strain on her lungs. "Stay with me," he said quietly. "Help is on the way." The Primrose prided itself on discretion. No matter the crisis, the unspoken rule among staff was simple: never let anything disrupt the diner's experience. For Victor Langston, the restaurant's manager, this rule was sacrosanct. Dressed in his signature tailored suit, Victor approached the scene with the urgency of a man whose kingdom was under siege. "What's going on here?" Victor demanded, his voice low but sharp enough to convey his irritation. "She's having an asthma attack," Ethan replied, his focus unwavering as he continued to support the woman. "I called for an ambulance." Victor's eyes darted around the room, taking in the diner's concerned murmurs and the heads turning toward the commotion. His expression darkened. "Move her to the back," he ordered. "We can't have this happening in the middle of the dining room." Ethan looked up at Victor, incredulous. "She's struggling to breathe. Moving her could make it worse." Victor's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "Ethan, this is a fine dining establishment. Our reputation depends on maintaining a certain atmosphere. Handle this discreetly, or there will be consequences." Ethan's jaw tightened. He met Victor's gaze with a quiet defiance. Her life is more important than the restaurant's reputation. For a moment, neither man spoke, the tension between them as palpable as the weight of the dining room's silence. Finally, Victor threw up his hands in exasperation. "Fine. Do what you want," he muttered before walking away. Minutes later, the paramedics arrived. They worked quickly, administering oxygen and checking her vitals before preparing to transport her to the hospital. As they wheeled her out, the woman reached for Ethan's hand. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice faint but filled with gratitude. Victor was waiting for Ethan in the staff room after the ambulance left. The door closed with a soft but decisive click, sealing the two men in a confrontation that had been building since the night began. "You embarrassed this restaurant tonight," Victor began, his tone icy. "Do you have any idea how many complaints I've already received?" Ethan stood firm, his voice steady. "I did what was right. That woman needed help." Victor's lip curled into a sneer. "Right? This isn't about what's right. It's about what's good for business. And tonight, you made this restaurant look unprofessional. If protecting the restaurant's image means ignoring someone in need, then I don't want to work here," Ethan shot back. Victor's eyes narrowed, his tone turning venomous. "Then consider this your last night. You're fired." The word stung, but Ethan refused to show it. He grabbed his belongings and walked out of the restaurant without looking back. As the night air hit his face, he felt a strange mix of anger, sadness, and something close to relief. He had lost his job, but he hadn't lost himself. Ethan sat on a bench outside the restaurant, staring blankly at the streetlights. The adrenaline from the night's events had worn off, leaving him feeling hollow and unsure of what came next. The thought of starting over was daunting, but deep down, he knew he couldn't regret his decision. "Excuse me," a voice interrupted his thoughts. Ethan looked up to see a man in his 60s standing before him. He was tall and well-dressed, with an air of quiet authority. Despite his composed demeanor, there was a warmth in his expression that immediately put Ethan at ease. "You're the young man who helped my wife," the man said, extending a hand. "I'm Charles Foster." Ethan shook his hand, recognition dawning on his face. "How is she?" "She's stable now, thanks to you," Charles replied. "The doctors said your quick thinking made all the difference." Ethan nodded, relief washing over him. "I'm glad she's okay." Charles studied him for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. "You showed a lot of courage tonight. Not everyone would have done what you did." Ethan shrugged, his smile faint. "I just did what anyone should do." "Maybe," Charles said, "but not everyone would have put their job on the line to do it." He paused, as if weighing his next words. "My wife and I run a foundation called Second Chances. We help people who've fallen on hard times, homelessness, unemployment, addiction. Someone with your heart would be a perfect fit for our team." Ethan blinked, taken aback. "You're serious?" "Absolutely," Charles said, his smile widening. "The work is hard, but it's meaningful. And I think you'd be great at it." For the first time that night, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope. "I'd love to." Part 5, Ethan's first day at Second Chances. The following Monday, Ethan stood outside the modest yet inviting building that housed Second Chances. It wasn't grand or imposing like the Primrose, but it exuded a sense of purpose. A sign above the door read, "Everyone deserves a second chance," and below it, a smaller plaque displayed the names of the founders, Charles and Margaret Foster. Ethan pushed the door open and was greeted by the sounds of activity. Volunteers were sorting donations, caseworkers were chatting with clients in soft tones, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. It was a far cry from the rigid professionalism of the restaurant, but it felt alive. "Welcome, Ethan," Charles said warmly, walking toward him. "Let me show you around." As they toured the facility, Ethan took in the scope of what second chances offered. Beyond the shelter and food pantry, the organization provided job training, mental health counseling, and even legal aid for those trying to regain stability. Charles explained each service with a mix of pride and humility. "We started this foundation after Margaret retired," Charles said, his tone reflective. "She always believed that kindness, when coupled with action, could change lives. And after what you did for her, I know you share that belief." Ethan nodded, feeling both inspired and overwhelmed. "I'm ready to help however I can." Margaret was waiting in the main office, her smile lighting up the room. "Ethan. It's so good to see you again," she said, embracing him gently. "You've already proven your heart is in the right place. Now it's time to put it to work." She introduced Ethan to Sarah, one of the lead caseworkers. Sarah was a no-nonsense woman in her 30s with a deep understanding of the people she served. Her sharp wit and unwavering dedication had earned her the respect of clients and colleagues alike. "So you're the guy who gave Victor a run for his money," Sarah said, smirking as she shook Ethan's hand. "Something like that," Ethan replied, smiling sheepishly. "Well, let's see if you've got what it takes to handle this place," Sarah said, handing him a folder. "Your first assignment is Diego Ramirez. He's been in and out of shelters for over a decade, and he doesn't trust easily. If you can get through to him, I'll be impressed." Ethan glanced at the file. Diego's story was heartbreaking. A former construction worker whose life had unraveled after a workplace injury. Medical debt, addiction, and homelessness had followed, leaving him isolated and deeply skeptical of help. "I'll do my best," Ethan said, determined. Diego was seated in the common room, hunched over a steaming cup of coffee. His wiry frame and weathered face hinted at years of hardship, and his wary eyes darted toward Ethan as he approached. "Diego?" "I'm Ethan," he said, pulling up a chair. "I'm here to help, but only if you're comfortable with it." Diego snorted. "Help, huh? Heard that before. Always ends the same." Ethan leaned forward, his tone gentle but firm. "I'm not here to force anything on you. I just want to understand what you've been through. No judgment, no strings." Diego studied him for a long moment before grumbling, "Suit yourself." Over the next few weeks, Ethan met with Diego regularly, never pushing too hard but always showing up. They talked about Diego's past, the accident that had ended his career, the family he'd lost, and the bitterness that had become his armor. "You think you can fix me?" Diego asked one evening, his voice tinged with sarcasm. "No," Ethan replied honestly. "But I can walk with you while you figure out what's next." It was a small breakthrough, but it was enough. Diego eventually agreed to enroll in Second Chance's job training program. It wasn't easy, his self-doubt often threatened to derail his progress, but Ethan was always there to encourage him. From practicing interview skills to celebrating small milestones, Ethan became Diego's unwavering advocate. When Diego landed a part-time job at a local hardware store, the transformation was palpable. For the first time in years, he stood a little taller, his voice carrying a newfound confidence. "Thanks for not giving up on me," Diego said one afternoon, shaking Ethan's hand. "I never will," Ethan replied. "You've got this." Ethan quickly realized that Second Chances was about more than helping individuals, it was about creating a community. Clients who had once been on the brink of despair were now volunteering to help others, their gratitude fueling a cycle of kindness. One such client was Elena, a young mother who had fled an abusive relationship. When she first arrived at the shelter, she was timid and withdrawn, her spirit crushed by years of control. Ethan worked closely with her, helping her secure housing and connecting her with a counselor who specialized in trauma recovery. Over time, Elena began to regain her independence. She enrolled in self-defense classes, found a job as a receptionist, and even started mentoring other women at the shelter. "If it weren't for you, I'd still be stuck," she told Ethan one day. "Now, I want to pay it forward." Her words stayed with Ethan, a reminder of the profound impact of even the smallest acts of kindness. Not every case ended in success, and the failures weighed heavily on Ethan. One of the most painful moments came when Jenna, a young woman battling addiction, relapsed after months of progress. She disappeared from the shelter, leaving behind a note that simply read, "I'm sorry." Ethan was devastated. "I thought we were making a difference," he confided to Sarah. "We are," Sarah said gently. "But not everyone's ready to be helped. All we can do is plant seeds and hope they grow." Inspired by Elena and others like her, Ethan proposed a new initiative, the Pay It Forward program. The idea was simple: former clients who had rebuilt their lives would mentor current clients, sharing their experiences and offering guidance. The program's first event was held in the foundation's main hall. Diego spoke about his journey, Elena shared her story of resilience, and even Marcus, a former skeptic, stood up to express his gratitude. "Kindness saved me," Marcus said, his voice cracking with emotion. "And now, it's my turn to pass it on." The room erupted into applause, and Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of pride. The program was a success, and its impact rippled far beyond what he could have imagined. A year after joining Second Chances, Ethan was invited to speak at the Foundation's annual gala. Standing before an audience of donors, staff, and clients, he reflected on his journey. "I thought losing my job at the Primrose was the worst thing that could happen to me," he began. "But it turned out to be the best. It led me here, to a place where I can make a real difference." As the room erupted in applause, Ethan felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He had found his calling, not as a waiter serving meals, but as a builder of hope. Years later, Ethan would reflect on the countless lives he had touched and the lessons he had learned. The foundation continued to grow, fueled by the compassion of those who believed in the power of second chances. And Ethan, now a leader within the organization, remained as committed as ever to the work that had given his life meaning. Through every struggle and triumph, Ethan had discovered that kindness wasn't just an action, it was a force capable of transforming the world. As Ethan settled into his work at Second Chances, he began to realize just how many stories existed in the shadows of the bustling city. Every person who walked through the doors of the foundation carried with them a history of struggle, loss, and survival. Yet, within those stories, Ethan saw glimmers of hope and resilience. It was these glimmers that fueled his commitment to his new role. One such story was that of Brenda, a middle-aged woman who had once been a successful nurse but had fallen into homelessness after a series of personal tragedies. Brenda had lost her home after a bitter divorce and spent years on the streets, where she developed a dependency on alcohol to cope with the harsh realities of her life. When Brenda arrived at Second Chances, she was guarded and skeptical, her pride bruised by the circumstances that had brought her there. Ethan was assigned as her caseworker and approached her with his characteristic patience and empathy. "I know this must be hard," he said during their first meeting. "But you've already taken the first step by walking through that door. That takes strength." Brenda scoffed, her tone defensive. "Strength? You call this strength? I'm a mess." Ethan leaned forward, his voice gentle. "You've been through a lot, Brenda. But being here means you're ready to start rebuilding. And we're here to help." Over time, Brenda began to open up about her struggles. She spoke of the nights she spent in shelters, the shame she felt when people avoided her gaze on the streets, and the guilt she carried for not being able to see her children. Ethan listened without judgment, offering her the space to process her emotions. With his encouragement, Brenda enrolled in a substance abuse program and began attending group therapy sessions. She also reconnected with her love for caregiving, volunteering at a local clinic that partnered with the foundation. Slowly but surely, Brenda began to rebuild her life. The turning point came when Brenda was offered a part-time position as a caregiver for the elderly. The day she received the job offer, she hugged Ethan tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." As Ethan gained experience, he began to take on more responsibilities within the foundation. Charles, recognizing Ethan's natural leadership skills, invited him to help design new programs aimed at addressing the root causes of homelessness. One initiative Ethan proposed was the Skill Bridge program, which focused on equipping clients with practical skills tailored to their individual interests. The program offered workshops on everything from computer literacy to trade skills like carpentry and plumbing. Ethan believed that giving people the tools to support themselves was just as important as providing temporary relief. The program's first graduate was Marcus, the former teacher who had once resisted Ethan's help. Marcus discovered a talent for woodworking during one of the workshops and began creating handcrafted furniture. With the foundation's support, he eventually opened a small business, using a portion of his earnings to mentor others at Second Chances. "It feels good to give back," Marcus said during a ribbon-cutting ceremony for his shop. "I never thought I'd be standing here today. And I wouldn't be, if it weren't for people like Ethan." Ethan watched the ceremony with a mixture of pride and humility. Marcus's success was a reminder that change was possible, even for those who felt lost. As Second Chances expanded, so did its challenges. The demand for services grew, stretching the foundation's resources thin. Ethan often found himself working long hours, juggling multiple cases, and grappling with the emotional toll of the work. Despite his best efforts, there were times when he felt overwhelmed. Sarah, who had become both a mentor and a close friend, noticed Ethan's exhaustion. One evening, as they reviewed files late into the night, she placed a hand on his shoulder. "You can't pour from an empty cup, Ethan," she said gently. "Take care of yourself, or you won't be able to take care of anyone else." Ethan nodded, her words resonating deeply. He began setting boundaries, carving out time to recharge and reflect. He also leaned on his colleagues, trusting them to share the workload and provide support. The foundation, too, adapted to its growing needs. Charles and Margaret worked tirelessly to secure additional funding, organizing fundraisers and forging partnerships with local businesses. Their dedication inspired Ethan to keep pushing forward, even on the hardest days. One of the most significant milestones in Ethan's journey came when Second Chances partnered with a local technology company to launch a digital literacy program. The program aimed to bridge the gap between the homeless community and the modern job market by teaching clients essential computer skills. Ethan was instrumental in designing the program, drawing on his interactions with clients to ensure it met their needs. The classes quickly became a hit, empowering participants to apply for jobs, access online resources, and reconnect with family members through technology. One of the program's most memorable success stories was Alex, a young man who had been homeless since his late teens. Alex had always been curious about technology but had never had the opportunity to explore it. Through the digital literacy program, he discovered a passion for coding and eventually secured an internship at the tech company that had sponsored the program. "Ethan," Alex said during his last day at the foundation, "you gave me more than a chance. You gave me a future." Years passed, and Second Chances continued to grow under the leadership of Charles, Margaret, and Ethan. The foundation became a model for other organizations, its innovative programs and client-centered approach earning national recognition. Ethan, now a senior director at the foundation, often reflected on his journey. The young waiter who had once been fired for standing up for what was right had found a career that gave his life meaning. He had seen firsthand the transformative power of kindness, not just in the lives of the people he served, but in his own life as well. One evening, as he prepared to leave the office, he found a handwritten note waiting on his desk. It read, "Dear Ethan, thank you for believing in people like me. Your kindness saved my life, and I'll never forget it. Diego." Ethan smiled, tucking the note into his pocket. It was moments like these that reminded him why he had chosen this path. No matter how challenging the work became, he knew it was worth it. The impact of Second Chances extended far beyond the walls of the foundation. Former clients like Diego, Brenda, Marcus, and Elena went on to mentor others, creating a ripple effect of compassion that spread throughout the community. Ethan often marveled at how one act of kindness, standing up for Margaret on that fateful night at the Primrose, had led to a lifetime of meaningful change. Through the struggles and triumphs, Ethan had learned that kindness was more than a fleeting gesture. It was a force that could heal wounds, rebuild lives, and create a better world.